this is a little agenda we prepared. So how we are going to do this is Professor Dietrich will present first, and then Miss Kayla and myself, and then we'll try to have some panel discussion at the end, and then if time permitted, there's going to be Q&A session. And for presenters, I'm going to go through your slides, so just give me a cue to go to the next slides. So now, Professor Dietrich.
Okay, so everyone, got two topics for you today. First is a quick one where I'm going to give you a few takeaways from some casual games analytic talks that I checked out recently. So we go to the next slide. So I attended a few sort of talks from GameAnalytics.com, and sorry, got frog in my throat. I'm cold. So this is from a series of talks on game analytics, mainly geared towards casual, very, very casual games. The kind of games that you see on ads with they have like the pull the pin to drop the lava and rescue the guy, that sort of thing. And these talks, I'm less interested about the analytics section of the talks. I'm more interested in how they went in and they talked about, they sort of repurposed these talks to talk about COVID a little bit, which is they added a few sort of notes about how COVID has changed what is going on with their industry. So next slide. Next slide, please. All right. So basically, what's happened here? The general takeaway that a lot of these talks had is that looking at mobile games, more specifically these sort of very casual mobile games that they traffic in, they in general saw an increase in their user base, a fairly large increase in their user base going into the sort of quarantine lockdown era. So really getting into March of 2020 is when they started to see really large increases in their user base, large increase in numbers, and also a large increase in monetization, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. This is another slide pulled from one of their presentations where they go in and they talk about how the U.S. is sort of their main attractive market. Japan, as usual, sort of high. It costs a lot to acquire users, but they tend to monetize well. And then they made some points that they saw, a doubling of ad impressions coming in from China over COVID-19, and that was, a very significant growth factor for them. Okay, next slide, please. So this is another chart coming in from the slides where they're again observing these really significant increases happening at the various lockdown points within various regions. And particularly, that European lockdown is a very large increase. USA starting lockdown, another 5% increase. So they saw an increase in their unique users, the number of users that they're using their games. And so there was actually almost this tone of sort of effervescence about the conversations where they're saying like, hey, we're in COVID over here, but guess what, guys? This is actually really good for us. We are doing really well as far as users because everyone can't leave home, so they're just going to play games on their mobile devices. Yay, us. But there was another point of caution that they had here where they said like, hey, this is great. This is monetizing really well for us, but keep in mind the thing that we don't know about is what this is going to look like in the future. So one of the big words of caution they had was where they basically said like, hey, as mobile game developers, we know what our sort of seasonal change looks like, where we know we have really big spikes going in for like New Year's, for Christmas, going into holidays, Golden Week in Japan, or Chinese New Year's. We know we can expect, we normally expect, 2 to 10x increases depending on the region and the country going in there. Don't necessarily expect the same multiplier because this increase that we're seeing now, yes, it's this like often like this near doubling of the number of users we have here, but it's not necessarily an increase in the baseline. So that we might just be eating our pie earlier. Let's be careful about that. So that was sort of the general tone of the conversation that came in there. Next topic, lightning through all these pieces. So the other part I wanted to talk to you about was game development in Japan during COVID-19. So I reached out to a few of my sources to get an idea of like how they were dealing with the COVID situation in terms of the games industry. Next slide. So a little bit of context. So COVID, as it's occurred in Japan, the numbers are not nearly as big as we have in the States. They're looking at 96,000 cases, 1,700 deaths. A lot of those are located in Tokyo and Osaka, and a bit more in Kanagawa. These are the top three areas in terms of cases and deaths. A little bit of more context here. Japan is operating with a ban of foreign nationals entering into the company. Hopefully that's gone before I try to take everyone on a Japan trip. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well. There's also been a fair bit of criticism towards Japan about their actually relatively low testing rate. So there is some criticism that there might not be detecting a lot of cases that are going on there. Talking with some friends, testing still actually, there's no free testing in general available for folks. There's testing available for relatively low prices, but it's not free. At this point, most schools they're in person with some level of social distancing going on. There are a lot of pictures of kids at their desks with big plexiglass things around the desk, that sort of thing. Also here, a really big thanks to Tomoya Haraguchi, a Tritonic, who's giving me a lot of the information here. He does a lot of great groundwork for me. He is awesome, one of my former coworkers back at Innis. Next slide. So let's talk about the remote work adoption. So the adoption, this is the sort of the timeline that Haraguchi-san sort of told me about, where in January, when people were starting to become aware of this COVID thing happening, they mostly sort of thought of it as being something, it's a China problem. I guess it'll stay in China, was the general thought. It didn't really feel real. Obviously, it became a lot more real very quickly. So so that caused a push towards remote work happening in Japan, where early adopting companies started at the end of January, with later adopters happening in February, and then the sort of stragglers starting to do remote work around mid-March. One of the observations Haraguchi-san made here was that he noticed that companies like Bandai Namco and Sega were among the early adopting companies. His theory for this is that this is because Bandai Namco and Sega have a lot of staff from other companies at their companies, so they have a very sort of strong sense of responsibility of making sure that they don't get people from other companies sick. So they were very, very quick to adopt remote work policies. In general, the remote work has the plan that most companies had was to sort of operate with remote work until about mid-September. So a lot of companies have sort of shifted from there. Next slide, please. So this is a collection of sort of the opinions that Haraguchi-san sort of shared with me, that a lot of the producers that he's talked to, that he's worked with, what their thoughts were regarding how well remote work worked. And in general, they're not super happy with it. There are a lot of people saying like, hey, maybe just as Japanese people, we're just not suited to doing remote work. Companies, they often leave, a lot of companies don't explicitly set out the boundaries of what your work duties are. If you ever work in a Japanese company, the contracts can be surprisingly small. Like the contracts that I had while working there, they're generally about like 2 pages long. And there's a lot of stuff that is just left up to just implication, where you just like, yeah, you do the right thing. So there, we don't have like the huge, big binders of every sort of situation explicitly laid out that we have in American work contracts. So there's some opinions coming from the producers saying like, maybe this culturally it's not a good fit because we don't explicitly say what we should be doing. One person sort of expressed this idea as like, hey, could it be that basically because we're kind of like a monoculture where you can just not say things, maybe that means that our ability to explicitly define boundaries is kind of like underdeveloped because we just don't do it as much. And a lot of times in Japanese companies, when there's a problem going on, there is a tendency to kind of gather everyone together for like a big meeting, say like, okay, let's all get together and hash this out. And there was someone in there who said like, that habit that we have getting everyone together, like maybe that's also a tactic to avoid like, personal responsibility, which is kind of really what you need in order to effectively do remote work. Now, that being said, my own opinion coming in here, I think there is a tendency. I think I've observed a sort of tendency of a lot of sort of Japanese workers who kind of basically they assume that difficulties they're having are almost always like a cultural aspect. They'll say like, "Oh, remote work's not going well." Well, that must be because remote work doesn't work well for Japanese folks, with the implied assumption that it works everywhere else but Japan. But I think a lot of the criticisms or the concerns that we're having here, like these are the same criticisms that I think we're having too. We're just like, man, it's if we don't explicitly set the boundaries, remote work doesn't really work well. So there are a lot of commonalities there. So let's see. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so a contrary opinion also popped up in the mix, which is kind of fun. Was here's an unexpected positive of remote work. One of the producers that Harushi-san talked to said, like, you know, the weird thing that was kind of nice about this is we figured out that the staff, we can basically use remote work as a way to tell which staff are kind of like good at working independently and which are not. And basically what they said, like, we started having this process of essentially like we had a custom staff, so we tended to keep the people who could work remotely, and we got rid of those who can't. And in general, the people you ended up keeping were people who were experienced, were a lot more sort of self-driven, and so there are people who, and it was mostly their experienced staff was in general better able to handle remote work. So in a way, they kind of found this to be a sort of possibly an effective filter for ineffective staff that could kind of like slide in the in-person setup. This is a bit of a dangerous rubric to use, I think, but it is something. Something that I think it speaks to is maybe the difficulty of training up new staff, especially in a remote environment. Teaching that sort of personal task and responsibility, like that's something that new staff don't necessarily come ingrained with, and you kind of have to really train it into them. And this is where suddenly dropping people into remote is, I think, very difficult. Okay, so some other observations. Oh, back once more, not quite. Sorry. So a few other notes on remote communication. They mentioned that, like, hey, they try to emulate like having like after work like drinking parties online. Doesn't really work. Doesn't really fill the same need. Clear tasking. If your tasks are clear, remote works well. Evaluating people's work, giving people feedback is not as easy to do. And in general, they talked about morale gradually dropping as there was a buildup of frustration of not being able to see what's happening in real time in the office in front of them. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so with regards to returning to in-person work, at this point, roughly like every other company is sort of about return to in-person, but they have the stipulation that workers who want to stay working remotely are able to do so. In Japan, there's a mask-wearing culture, so almost everyone around the country is wearing masks out in public. Companies are stocking up with disinfectants, sanitizers, thermometers. They're usually having regular temperature checks when you're going into the office. I think this is actually mandated in Tokyo right now, where you have to open up your windows for at least an hour a day in order to air out the building. And we shall have to see how this works out over time. So that's my stuff.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dietrich. And now I'm presenting Miss Kayla Harris from Big Q's Game.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kayla, and today I'll be talking about, I guess, Big Huge Games is game development during COVID-19, but also just taking into account that I have friends at other studios in Europe and also across the U.S. So even though I'm talking about my company experiences specifically, after talking with them, a lot of the things that I'm going to say, they're also saying pretty much the same things industry-wide. I guess the only thing I wanted to point out was that Rob said it. Basically, the games industry is like the only entertainment industry that's not hemorrhaging money. We're actually growing. We're actually doing well, at least from a financial standpoint, as an industry. I can't speak for everyone individually because people are still getting laid off and those kinds of things. But as an industry, the games industry is definitely still profiting while other entertainment avenues aren't doing as great. Next slide, please. So remote work adoption. So we began working from home in early March. I think it was either the first week or the second week. I don't really remember exactly. It wasn't because we had any positive tests. It was actually before I think the governor of Maryland even mandated that we did it. I think we did it the week before. Which really just came down to, hey, I have a sister that works at the company down the street, and she might have been exposed to XYZ because somebody at her company tested positive. Like, it was basically that. It was like there's just too many moving parts, so the company basically shut it down so everyone go home. So when we were starting remote work, we were allowed to bring our desk chairs and other necessary office equipment home. I'm sitting in my desk chair right now. It's really comfy. It's much better than what I had here anyway. We've been receiving a monthly stipend for increased internet and HVAC usage. If you guys don't know, most companies, to my knowledge, are saving tons of money because they're not housing all those employees in the building. So at least my company, I think you also have also given a percentage of that money back to the employees, since we're now using more of our own internet and more of our own AC and now heaters in our own houses. We've also received a monthly research stipend, I think around $50 for game purchases. So definitely taking advantage of that. It can be like just an in-game purchase, or it can be a straight up just whole game purchase. Whichever you want to use it for. I use it every month. I think I just did it for Watch Dogs Legion yesterday, so I'll be playing that tonight when that comes out. So that's definitely been helpful. I also point out, because it says for research purposes, like as game developers, you should always be playing games, and of course doing other things outside of game development that give you more experiences so you can come take those experiences back and make better games. But yeah, so I thought that was nice of the company to give us the game stipend so we can, in effect, play more games while we're being held up in the house for months on end. We were allowed to bring company snacks and beverages home so they wouldn't spoil out the office. So that was great. And also, so Big Huge has specifically repurposed its food budget, because he's had a food budget for the office, and actually started donating that money to the Baltimore area food banks. So instead of just keeping that money, they've actually been donating the money they would have spent on food for the office, which I think is great. Lastly, we also made a socially conscious donation to charities, mostly around the Baltimore area, but in other areas as well, to help further Black Lives Matter movement. So I thought that was great that the company actually did that. Next slide, please. So I guess similar to Rob, I'll be talking about, I guess, how well does remote work. Opinions, especially among all of us developers, are extremely positive. Many of us feel that there's really no reason to ever go back full time. I'm going to be completely honest. There at the beginning there were some pain points, like you had to make sure that everyone's on the same page, make sure we're using Slack, make sure you're using Zoom, make sure you're using just anything, make sure the communication channels are flowing. But really after the very, painful beginnings, it's more like, okay, now we're in a flow, now we know what we're doing. Even our CEO, who was extremely, before the pandemic, against working remotely, he's now contemplating, oh yeah, maybe whenever we do go back to the office, possibly we could have 1 or 2, maybe 3 remote work from home days instead of mandating everyone be in the office every day, because we've been able to show that, hey, we can still get our work done. And I've been talking to my mom, who's a director at a hospital, and she keeps saying that people are working more now across industries at home than they would have been working in the office, because they're just contributing more time. There really isn't a set stop working time like there is when you're in the office. Like in the office, it's 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, you're gonna literally log off and go home or go do whatever you want to do. But in a work from home setting, there isn't as much of a, hey, I need to get home to do anything. You're already at home, so you're not really logging off basically like you normally would, right? Especially for delegations, this is, I guess, why our CEO and a lot of us feel that we don't really ever have to go full time back in the office. Like, it'd be great to get more camaraderie in the office, but it's because we're still being successful. Like, Dominations has released several game updates, including the largest update of the year, which was the Information Age, which came out almost a month ago now, which is the biggest release we do in a new age release every single year, and that's the biggest one. So we were able to prove that, hey, we were able to successfully complete our biggest release of the year while completely working from home. So I think that was great. And I was also the lead designer for the Black History Matters in game events. So we were able to take these socially conscious things and still stick them into our history game. So there wasn't really any disconnect from our players and from working and doing our normal things that we've always done. Furthermore, as a studio, we launched Arcane Showdown on mobile and on Steam. So we've even proven that, hey, we can launch a new game in a pandemic while working from home remotely. So the argument for the higher ups to say everyone come back to the office full time is just getting weaker and weaker, in my opinion. We've also spun up more prototype projects. I'm also on one of those new ones, so can't talk about it yet. Maybe in the future. We've also hired many more staff. Of course, there's been comings and goings across the industry. Our studio included. Lots of people are moving, changing jobs, but we've been able to hire more people. More people have moved to the Baltimore area to work here, and yeah. So thanks. Next slide, please. So I kind of alluded to already, like remote communication, and I'm going to talk about returning to in person a little bit too. So at the very beginning, for the studio as a whole, communication was a little shaky. But especially I've seen this with the new hires, and I think Rob kind of touched on this too. Onboarding and communicating with new hires can be difficult. Like unless you're in a meeting like on Zoom with them, you're probably not going to see their face. You have to make sure that you're being wary of how you talk to a new person on Slack because they haven't met you. Like you have to make sure that they're not being that basically they're being taken care of because they're in a completely new environment, completely new everything. So of course that's probably to me, in my opinion, the biggest challenge is making sure that your new hires are being integrated well. And that's really because they can't get the camaraderie from the company that you would have really gotten in an in-person setting. And in order to try to help combat that, the company has spun up more channels for communication like Discord, for like not just games but also like working purposes too, just to get people more engaged. Weekly group outings and even our pub club have moved to Zoom. Of course, for like the longest time, those were kind of dying and people weren't really engaging with them. But as the weather is starting to change, it seems like people are starting to engage with that a little bit more. And also some in-person area meetups have begun. I haven't gone to any, but they, I think some pods like either Baltimore City or Towson or different areas are starting to meet up and just get outside and to not be cooped up in the house so much, which I think is great, especially the new hires, because it's really getting them to at least meet their coworkers other than just in a box on Zoom. And most other companies like Blizzard, Oculus, etc., none of them are returning to in-person until July 2021 at the earliest. Big Huge Games is still TBD, but Raw's not returning to the office for 2021, so we'll be definitely at least working from home for at least November and December. We'll see what happens in the new year. But yeah, so I guess a remote versus in-person, I guess, fight, which will eventually happen, will have to be seen once our offices reopen, which other offices like across the country for other game studios reopen. And I guess we'll, as an industry, have to take into account the new challenges of facing when we go back in, how often do you go to the office, how often do you stay at home and work, and basically juggling those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's it. So next slide.
Great, thank you. And now I'm going to talk about some changes made and changes we can make. So at the beginning, I prepared my presentation evolving around some statistics just like Rob, but Rob actually covers pretty well about the growth of the mobile game market and game industry in general. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I will just try to point out a few interesting points that came out from this pandemic situation. So changes. The COVID-19 has changed many ways how we live, and I want to point out two things. One, I mean, obviously from contact to no contact or low contact. So it changed the way we interact with other people. It changed the way we are engaged with some social activities. And obviously practicing social distancing is another challenge that we have faced, because whenever we have an event or something, we must think about that the practicing social distancing. So because of it, it again changed the way we host the event or literally do anything. Even now, I mean, this guest speaker series is great, and now, I mean, who would have thought like we would host this type of guest lecture using this Google Meet? And so it's interesting. And then like maybe some of you guys just decide to, I'm just going to go to this, go check out this guest speaker thing. So I was in my pajama. Maybe I am in still my pajama and then just turn on and then get that engagement. So it literally changed the way that we've been engaged with the event or interact with other people. And then yeah, it kind of worked out in a sense because many people now actually think of abandoning like space in terms of meeting people. So that worked really well for game industry because a lot of times, yes, we are game designers, game developers. We work with computer all the time, and then sometimes people actually has that burden to make that physical contact with other people. But now you can simply send a message on Discord or some sort of cloud communication tool. So it actually kind of changed again the way we initiate that conversation or that social interaction. And because of these two changes, I want to point out that these two things. The COVID-19 lockdowns have boosted user engagement with video games and esports. And revenues for many gaming companies and platforms have increased during the pandemic. So again, Professor Dietrich mentioned this, and Ms. Kayla Harris also mentioned this. And yes, game industry. Luckily, we actually like saw that growth. We didn't hit that hard. We actually saw the growth, and then we could be. It's safe to say actually we are kind of one of the leading forces to change the work environment and change the way we work and be productive, quite honestly. So now, one thing I noticed, okay, this is one cartoon that I found. He said that since he's had a smartphone, he's lost the ability to watch anything on a big screen. So, from my own experience, okay, I see some more playing time on mobile game and mobile device, or not necessarily PC games time to time because fatigue from online life evolved with a computer monitor. So people sometimes want to be away from the screen, but still couldn't escape from the device and still have increased screen time with their mobile phone. So in a sense, now, whenever we deal with this laptop or desktop, or previously, like it wasn't that way, but now it's like, oh, I'm going to open my laptop for a meeting, or sometimes people consider the sitting in front of computer now considered as work time. So in a sense, to be away from that, people kind of look for some like the killing time, like simple casual game and mobile game. And funny observation from my own house, okay, the way we engage with others, where my 12-year-old daughter meets her friends these days. It was I was very surprised actually. Like my daughter, 12 years old, only like the seventh grade, and then she actually used Discord, and then she used those games, Valorant, Fortnite, and Among Us, as a platform to interact with her friends. And it's kind of funny because she doesn't go to school; she just take online school. So but she still needs some time with friends, and then they actually figured it out, and then they use Discord and playing these games together. And sometimes game really doesn't matter. They actually try to kind of be connected, and then so at the beginning, I was concerned, I was worried because I mean they probably played this game too much. But then again, it's really not necessarily about the game. It's more likely they get that feeling and sense that they belong to something together. So my daughter, for instance, she doesn't like. I mean, she's not good at Valorant at all. But then again, she wants to have that sense that she's belonging to something with her friend. So it's not really about the game, but game actually works as this social agent to tie a lot of people together. So now, my daughter and their friends, someone think, oh, we are together at least because we are playing this game together and having conversation on Discord together. And another thing is the way we experience sports. Okay, I mentioned that from contact to no contact. So now this is actually the titles from this year's. Okay, esports gaining its momentum, and like this one, USA Today, 27 million people watched the League of Legends World Championship, more than the World Series or NBA Finals. And more people watching League of Legends than the NBA Finals. Again, like all these headlines actually suggest that now esports is gaining its momentum. We have to understand the situation because if you think about it, yes, the NBA final was in the bubble, and then it wasn't really aired. It was actually aired on YouTube, so that can actually suggest more contents for OTT, like over the top platform. So now we can talk about that as well. But the bottom line is, like now because we are in this pandemic situation, people changed their view on this, even like a sports ship. Before, maybe, oh yeah, like no one really cared about esports or anything, but now more than ever, they actually watch esports. And then even though they don't watch it, but now they actually, maybe this is because this real true sports kind of got, it lost its kind of power and authority to be aired on the national platform, because now ESPN, ABC, or all these the broadcast company lost their revenue because like, there's no more or not enough this real sports event. So they actually reach out to some esports companies to air more esports event. So in a sense, this is a good momentum for esports, and then probably in a couple of years we will see more esports kind of penetrated in the major market. And and game designers and developers can use a game as a platform to respond to the COVID-19, and more specifically, use a serious game to respond to this. So a serious game or functional game, we all know what it is, but if you don't know what it is, serious game or functional games are games that are not necessarily for pure entertainment, but for the educating or simulation, so that it has like a non-pure entertainment impact or purpose. So that's what serious game. And then there have been many attempts to respond to COVID-19 with serious game. And my dog is barking, so I'm going to give one, milky one to my dog. Hopefully she'll be quiet. Okay. So I want to talk about this one thing. Okay. So there has been many attempts to think about what we can do as a game designer. And then obviously there are many people who thought of this, and then many people who produce game to respond to this. But I just want to invite you to think about these types of event to demonstrate the effort to respond to this COVID-19. This one just ended. So LabX, which is presented by the National Academy of Science, and then they team up with Indicate, and Georgia Tech was one of the body, and then CDC. They team up with those entities, and they created this game jam. So game jam is basically you invite anybody to create a game in short amount of time with a theme. So this year's theme, or this the theme for this specific event was jamming the curve. They try to use a game to educate people, or a game to kind of send a message about this pandemic situation, so that gamers or game developers, game designers can make positive impact on this issue. So I'm not going to go through everything, but you can Google this labx.org or jamming the curve, and then they have obviously it happened like amount of time given was about like three weeks, or actually 4 weeks. So game obviously are kind of not necessarily polished, but you can go through many games to get an idea of how we can potentially respond to this situation. So this was games with compelling protagonist And this is games that feature pro-social pandemic behavior, simulation style game, and character management, and classic games. So you can actually go here and then play some games here. And then again, games are not necessarily polished because once they became winner of this event, they will get actually some more money, some money to complete their production. But when you look at this, you can actually see, okay, how people will play this game and change their mindset about this the given topic. So I strongly recommend you to go here and come here and then play a few games and get the idea of what we believe actually. Like we believe when people play these games, they might get they will be better informed and then potentially can change their behaviors. All right, and now we only have actually 60 minutes, but let's try to kind of get through this. So questions I prepared for Professor Dietrich and Ms. Harris are, what's the biggest impact to game industry from the COVID-19? And what would be a new normal for game designer developer after the COVID-19 is over? And any advice for game designer to prepare the post-COVID-19 era? So I think you kind of covered first two questions. So let's go into the third question. Any advice for game designers to prepare the post-COVID-19 era?
Yeah, I would definitely, well, it's the same advice I feel like we always give, but I feel like it's more crucial now. So communication is going to be way more like up there. And Rob was even said that in Japan, like if you can't work from home well, and that's probably not just that you're not doing your job well, it's probably also that you're not communicating with your teammates well enough, right? So being able to show that, hey, I'm still engaged, hey, I'm still getting my work done, and being able to communicate that to other people is going to be a more crucial skill to have going forward. Because like I said, like I don't think going forward the industry as a whole is going to be 5 days a week, every day back in the office. I still think we're going to go back to the office, but I don't think it'll be like mandated like it used to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think one of the big takeaways here that I suspect is coming here is that the remote work is not going to go away. It's going to become a permanent part of the mix. It's too delicious for a lot of people, both on the working side and also on the company side. They can hire it with a wider geographic net when they do this. So that means that building up the skills that allow you to work remotely effectively are going to be really key, and that's going to involve being able to do things like you want to be able to explicitly state what tasks you are working on. You want to be able to identify problems, identify solutions for them. You want to get into a habit of letting other people know what you're working on. If you're running into trouble, you don't disappear. You let people know when that's happening, and you get into this sort of good habit of maintaining sort of this constant stream of communication that hopefully you can do almost unconsciously. One of the things that I sort of think of as a sort of a hallmark from the perspective of a manager for someone is a worker who is really pleasing to a manager is someone who basically, before I even have to ask them what the situation is, they've already told me that information. So I almost never have to explicitly ask them. I never have to think like, oh God, I gotta figure out what Bob's doing with the HUD changes that they talked about doing last week. I don't have to ask them because over the course of the week, like at the end of every day, Bob has been sending this update, letting me know. It's like, oh yeah, I worked on this part of the HUD. I encountered this. I ran into a problem where I think the HUD's not going to work at a different aspect ratio. I've reached out to so and so to ask them about that, or they'll say like, I'm not sure who should I talk to about that. Who would be the best person to ask about that? So there's this constant proactive communication. And you hear proactive as like tossed out as an easy word, but it really means something, and there's a reason it's such a key word to keep in mind.
What? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say like the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to accept jobs that are not in your preferred area, because like Rob said, like Professor Nam said, that remote work isn't going away. So I literally have a friend that lives 2 minutes away from me in Baltimore, and he's got a job at Blizzard. He's not expected to even move out there until next year at the earliest. So maybe he'll never have to move. So don't be afraid to like look at job locations that are maybe not where you would have thought to otherwise.
And one thing I want to add would be the work management. Like previously, if you go to work, that's the time your work starts. And then after you come home, you're done. But now, actually, when you have to log in your hours by yourself from home, it's a little different. You really have to have like manage your time well. And then sometimes, I mean, like you might kind of miss those time like, oh, if I just go there and I don't have to worry about like doing some Google search or some online shopping because I'm at work, so I'm still working, but now actually it's different. So try to think about that. And then some company actually has the different system, like you have to log in a certain website to prove your timeline, to prove your time constantly. Or actually there's bad companies which call you on your home phone. So I know like some government agencies actually give you like they install the landline phone for you, and then they call you at a certain time to check whether you're working or not. So eventually, work management will be kind of an issue in near future. And we don't have that much time. We actually have 1 minute, but we can go over a couple of minutes or a few minutes. So let's try to take like a couple of questions from the audience. If you have a question, you can post your question on the chat, or now it's time for you to turn on your mic and say something. Anybody?
While we're posting that, I'm going to sort of toss out one last bit of advice for working remotely, is get in the habit of leaving evidence of having worked around. So make lots of submissions into the company's source control, leave documents here, record your thoughts if you've been in a meeting, get the meetings down, save them someplace, put them into the shared drive. So as a manager is looking around and they ask themselves like, "Oh, how do I know so Bob's been working?" They can go there, they'll see like there's more files showing up, and so that'll give them a sense of peace, and they never have to bother you. If they become less scared, and sometimes that work is actually also useful too.
Yeah, I agree with Rob. And also, Nathaniel asked a question in the chat. Basically, he said, for anyone who hasn't seen it, question for Rob or Kayla, have you heard any talk about using social VR applications such as Allspace VR in the workplace or for outside of work events? I have not. And I think because, like President already said, we're already all too much on our devices and too much on Zoom. Any way to not have to do more of that for at least the time being is probably preferred.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about the use of it either. Occasionally I sort of fantasize about that. But I think for a lot of folks, we have a culture of being used to talking in text to begin with. And so there's sort of a natural ingrained setup there. And anything that sort of raises the cost of getting the communication started, there is going to be a barrier to entry.
And maybe time for just one more question.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So I got here a little bit late into the presentation, so I'm not sure if this question was answered, but you guys mentioned how online communication, like work from home, can have problems for new employees who are coming in, where they need to get trained up for like how life is at a company or like whatever proprietary software might be at the company. I don't know if this was answered, but have you guys seen how companies are taking on this challenge, or can you guys like kind of theorize, I guess, how they might tackle this kind of challenge for people that thrive in a in-person workplace and like actually benefit more from that face-to-face experience?
As far as I was talking from personal experience, I don't really have I don't know if the person that I had to help train thrives in an in-person setting or not, but I've had to help people, like a new designer come on Dalmatians, like while we've been in quarantine. And really, like, it's really about just having more patience, I think, and understanding that, yeah, you're going to share your screen, you're going to talk through these things, and you're going to get the code over here, you're going to look at the game problem over here, but just making sure the new person knows that they can always come to you and ask for questions, make sure they have other avenues they can go to get their questions answered. And just make sure that they know that it's okay to ask questions. The biggest problem, I think, from working from home for probably a new hire would be afraid and feeling that they're bothering someone else. That's not the case. Like right now, everyone's bothering everyone constantly because we're all not in the office. It used to just be walk down the hall and say, "Hey, XYZ problem," and then get a 5-second answer. Now it's like you have to type it out or message or do a call, just do something. Everything's going to take more time. Just be aware that it's going to take more time. Don't feel bad about that. And as far as like the in-person thing, I kind of feel like those people might have to adapt. It kind of sucks like right now if you're thinking about it, but you just have to get more of a remote working from home skill set for the time being.
One thing to add to that is I do have my kind of startup company, and I hire about like 9 people, well, almost 10 people now. And then sometimes, as a person who pay their time, it's better for you to talk to someone and to get the answer right away instead of you kind of sitting on the problem for 4 to 5 hours. So I don't want to kind of pay you like 5 hours of your time to kind of try to figure it out. Instead, you can talk to the senior guy and then get the answer, then everyone's happy.
And
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
oh, I was just going to say there's another question. I was going to say that in the chat they said, do you think this will lead to more opportunities to being hired by out-of-state companies? This has been my hope for silver lining since the pandemic began. So first of all, yeah, like my friend literally 2 minutes away got hired by Blizzard. He lives in Baltimore, so he doesn't live in California. And then I have another friend that's going to be hired, or maybe already got hired, I'm not sure. But it's in London, I think. And so he's also in America. So yes, that's more of a thing. And don't be afraid to take those opportunities because you're probably working from home or remotely for at least the next 6 months.
Right, but do keep in mind that a lot of those opportunities, they might be based on like it's a work from home temporarily. So you do have to make sure you know what's going on there. I know there are some Japanese firms that are also they are looking overseas particularly for more engineers, and they're hiring for remote work with the stipulation that they're expecting you to move to Japan. Yeah, so make sure you're clear on those details.
But one concern though, like now people might look into or explore more just outsourcing because you guys don't have to come, or we don't have to hire full-time person, and we don't have to have that presence, like physical presence here. Then maybe we'll just try to just outsource and then hire some part-time or contractor from remote place.
I've seen a lot of job postings for contractors from a ton of companies, so I think that's definitely ramping up.
Okay, and now it's 12:51, so I think here are some contact informations. And if you have a question, you're more than welcome to contact us. And then I think we had fun, right? Professor Dietrich and Ms. Harris. Yeah, it was a really good time, and I really appreciate the Kayla Harris and Rob Dietrich. I mean, they're amazing talk and sharing their personal experience. And yeah, I mean, we enjoyed. Maybe we should do it one more time next semester. Well, in person. I don't know. So we'll see. We'll see. And that's what we have. And I think that's it. And Professor Casey, anything to add?
What? No. It was good. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully I will see you in person soon.
Yep.
Or not. No.
Our next speaker series is about running an indie game studio, so be sure to look for that on the website and check that out as well.
Thank you, everyone.